Hey, welcome back to Overdrive Motorsports. This is the Rotax carburetor assembly video. So now we've just come out of the ultrasonic and blew out all of the parts so that they're nice and clean. Got a bunch of the grime outside of the carburetor. Everything's nice and shiny. So what we start out with is the needle and seat. So we got a new one out of the parts bin. Comes with a gasket. Make sure there's no gasket in there. Lay it in. It laid flat on its own, so it's ready to go. We take out the inlet needle. There's the old inlet needle. We'll get it off the sheet. Now, it's important that when you're doing this process, that you always test the go-kart afterwards if you're not familiar with doing this. So don't do this your first time before an important race. You want to get some practice in. So we've got our machine 9mm socket. Got the new inlet seat. Nice and snug. 9mm socket. You actually want to tighten this more than you'd think, but the aluminum that you're tightening into is quite soft, so you've got to be careful and really get a gentle feel for how tight you could go. So that's why we use such a short ratchet. Okay, you got your inlet seat. Now next, we're going to put the emulsion tube in. So the emulsion tube screws in. Final tighten once again. Inlet needle. Now we've got our float arm and float arm pin. It only goes in through one side and gets pushed all the way in. Once we're there, give it a little tap to get it all the way in. Now it's in, and that'll clear the float bowl. We want to get a float height on this again, as we just went back together. Now sometimes the old needle and seat will have collapsed or expanded a little bit, expanded on the rubber. So right now we're at 2437, and to me that's a little bit rich. So we're going to pull the pin out, and then to get this guy to come leaner, we're just going to flex the tab a little bit with your screwdriver. Get that guy back in. Same thing, give her a tap. Okay, so I'm going to get the float height gauge also. Which is the mandated Rotax item. And it must allow the float arm to be in between the two sides. So right there you've got a lot of gap on both sides. It'll be nice and legal. So next we'd like to get our pilot jet in. The pilot jet, you want to hold it up to the light and make sure you can see through it. In this case we can. Get the screwdriver. So we just went until it bottomed out, and then plus barely any more gets it super tight. Our number 60 outer jet. Our number 60 choke jet goes right there. Now, next, we can put our float pole on, brand new gasket. Goes on these two locating pins. And then our float bowl, put the side that says Alto towards the top. Both pins towards the middle. Now, these need to sit on top of the arms on this side. There you go. We've got our 3 4mm screws. Okay, so now those are just snug, but we're gonna have to go a little bit extra since the gasket is brand new. All right, so we got rid of our old fuel filter. We got this brand new one. So we put it on the fuel filter nut. And what we do, this is a two-part process. So we get it all the way in there and final tighten. And then we make a line from the fuel inlet onto that nut. Then we take it back out and we're going to make sure that the fuel flow is uninterrupted by the filter. So you can see the line here, if we follow it to the filter, it gets mostly the mesh screen. I'm just going to adjust it a little bit so it's purely on the mesh screen. Back in to tighten. Tighten back to the same place. So now we know that the fuel could come in and it won't hit a solid piece of plastic, it'll hit the filter. Now we've got our air screw. Now we're going to put into this location, being careful not to drop that spring. And the settings on this one was 2 turns out on the air screw. That's where we're going to set it. So we go all the way in. So we're going to go half, 1, half, 2 turns. Perfect. Now we've got our choke. You look here, the choke O-ring is in good shape. I like to drop just a little bit of oil in there so that it doesn't rip on installation. Remove some of the oil that we just put on. Now make sure it's all lubricated. And the oil we used was the XPS premix to make sure that it goes well with the gasoline when we get it together. And in this choke you could see that it did want to become flush with the carb body, which is nice. Sometimes you have to tap it in. So here there's no gap. Now we're going to tighten that quite a bit. There we go, that's final tightened. Now we take our main jet, install it all the way in. Now the main jet, you want to make sure it's butted and snug, but it doesn't want to be over tightened, because if you tighten it too much, then the emulsion tube is going to come out when you take it apart. We've got the drain nut. And there you have it. That's the Rotax Max carb reassembly.